I would like to welcome our listeners to The Responsible Edge back for another episode brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Mirry Christie. Mirry, thank you so much for giving up some of your time and joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Charlie. It's great to be here with you and looking forward to our chat.
Indeed, our chat. Very good. Now, Mirry, we've got 20 minutes to talk about you and your background and your experience, which I know is going to be tricky for us to sort of cover things in the kind of depth that probably it deserves. But start wherever you like. Just talk our listeners through kind of your background experience and perhaps in particular the role that corporate ethics, responsibility and sustainability has played in you doing what you've done so far in your career. Yeah,
thanks, Charlie. Well, I guess I'll give you a quick snapshot and overview of where I've come from. So, I was lucky enough back in 1999, so, a long time ago, to join a startup business, which grew and grew over the years. It's a company called Ochre, so it's an interiors brand, which may be known to some of your listeners. And I watched the business grow all the way through. And for many years, I ran the marketing team, which was brilliant. Brand communications, watching a really exciting business grow from, to begin with, setting up with no customers to reaching kind of over 35 million turnover and lots of stores and all kinds of exciting things. I was running the marketing, brand and communication side, which meant that, I was charged with, driving sales, all those kind of exciting things. But sustainability was not a discussion point at all. We worked very closely with suppliers, but, really it wasn't until the private equity investors came in, which was about 5 years ago, and started investing in the business, that the question then came up: who is handling ESG? Who is handling sustainability? I guess I was the mug when everyone else said, I don't want to touch it, that said, look, I'm interested. What does it mean? The next thing I knew is that I was signed up to a corporate sustainability course at NYU, at the Center of Sustainability in New York, virtual, sadly not in person. But then I really pivoted into a big learning curve. So we were sitting in New York with, the brands like Nike and Tesla and all those kind of big brands. And there was a little me who hadn't got a clue what this is all about. And I came out of 3 months of that thinking, wow, this is such a massively complicated area. And I really get that the corporate way that they do this is deeply impressive and, huge respect. But they have huge teams of people behind this. They have finance, resources, time. What happens to little old kind of SMEs? What do they do? How do they possibly understand where to start? So I went back to Ochre with all the knowledge and thought, let's just build this out. So, working to what the investors needed, let's build out a strategy. How do we do that? How do we make something that is super interesting and simple? So it's all about simplicity. How do we engage people both internally and externally so that they know what this means? How do we make sure this doesn't sit as a kind of, bolt on with one person accountable that doesn't know no one else knows what it's about? And how do we kind of embed this into the culture? So I just really learned on the go. So how to do it and to see what the reaction was from people. And then the investors who then were very keen for us to do B Corp and science-based targets and all the other bits that, came along. And I just threw myself into it. How do you write your first impact report? And I think there's no better way than to learn just getting stuck in. So we did that. And I think after that, I kind of sat back and thought, as much as I was attached and loved the Ochre brand for many years, I want to be able to help other SMEs. There are 99% of the companies in the UK are SMEs. And I really feel that, they needed the help. So I set up Be Able. And Be Able is a consultancy looking at both social and environmental impact of businesses. And it helps to business to define what sustainability means to them. Very often people haven't started. How do you start? Where do you start? And the other way we look at it is people say we're doing locks, but we don't know how to communicate it, which is something I'm sure you're very familiar with. So how do you communicate that piece so that it is not just externally, but also I think the value of doing that internally through, whatever kind of business you are.
Well, Mirry, that was an absolutely brilliant nutshell, and you might feel like you'd got away with sort of skipping things over and jumping straight in at 99 and the experience at Ochre. But we're going to go back, if I may, before we come to the present day and talk a bit more about Be Able. talk us through like your formative experience of growing up, and talk us through like your education. And you mentioned marketing comms. Were you always in marketing comms from the very outset? Like, just talk us through all of that.
Interesting. No, I mean, I grew up hilariously in a family where I definitely, being the girl in two boys, was not imagining to go. I think my father thought I was going to be just, married off to someone as long as I could cook. So the expectation was low. So when I turned around and said, I'm doing a degree in politics at Newcastle, I think both my parents were pretty kind of surprised. And I think having got through that, and study was never my strength, I kind of came out of that and was like, what am I going to do now? And by a kind of series of luck, I ended up working in a very niche, very upmarket PR agency. So working with great brands, Versace's, Ferragamo's, fashion, a lot of fashion, opening. It was a time when, there was events everywhere. We were doing Hempel hotels and openings and all kinds of kind of, crazy events every week and fashion shows. And it was good. And by a total, I spent a couple of years there and I felt like I was learning lots, but I was a cog in a wheel. And I ended up going to do kind of the opportunity came off of getting involved in Oka, and it started with just 3 founders. And I think they were, could you come and do PR for us? And I was like, I don't want to just do PR. I need to do more because I find it really limited. And they were like, look, there's no one here. It's just you. So I was like, I don't care whether I'm emptying the waste paper bin or speaking to a supplier. So I guess, suddenly it was back in the days of dial-up kind of modems to get your emails. And if you wanted to communicate with the supplier, and we launched the first container of rattan, which is where the business started, was on the sea. And I was trying to deal with a supplier in Myanmar and work out what a sea freight, how to kind of ship a container and what it meant and what a bill of lading. I didn't know any of this, but I loved it. It was just like all new, all different. One moment I'd be ringing up Sunday Times and saying, we're launching this brand, can you do a feature? And the next moment I was trying to work out how to get the right documentation to release a container into Felixstowe, or wherever it was. And I grew, then it kind of came down to, so the business was kind of started growing, and I ended up in the marketing piece purely because I think I gravitated towards that. I had the PR background. We were trying to produce magazines. It was a kind of direct consumer before the stores opened. So we were trying to produce kind of what was a kind of catalogue, which was such a dirty word, to make it really upmarket. And we were going against the trend. So I kind of sat in that space working with the founders on trying to take their vision and make it happen. And it was a challenge. We had no budget. We were trying to do things to get our exposure and to tell people what we were doing. And it was really exciting. And I loved it. And actually, I loved that whole energy of, right, okay, what are we going to do this week that costs us nothing, that's going to get us, that's going to get us more sales? And how many sales have we got every Monday morning? And just that was, and I think I just fell into that. And then I loved growing the team. So I loved being with people, growing the team. So we had a design studio, copy studio, we had lots of, PR team, and it just grew from like 1 or 2 people into kind of much larger team.
And that must have been, I mean, there's so many things in that, Mirry, that jump out. It sounds like you were the chief glue officer at the start of Oka, pulling the whole thing together. The other thing that strikes me, that notion of, and I have to get him in because I would love to get him on the show. And if he ever does listen in, it would be absolutely fantastic. But Rory Sutherland is a particular kind of hero of mine. And he, I think, talks about, I think there's a brilliant YouTube video that he does, TED Talk, where he talks about sweating the small stuff and how there should be what he describes, I think, as a chief detail officer within organizations, which is somebody who should have a lot of power, but be given a very small budget. And they should be charged with trying to find those details, those little sizable impact sort of tweaks and iterations and improvements that can be made to the customer experience or the stakeholder experience. I think it's a brilliant idea.
It was so like that. It was, I was quite a terrier in those days. I just wanted everything right. I'd come through this kind of rather smart luxury PR agency where everything had to be immaculate. You never sent a label out without typing it. Every report was like perfect. And I came into this and I was just like, everything had to be right. Customer service was so right. I'd find myself at 8 o'clock on a Friday night picking up a set of glasses and delivering them to a client in the other side of London because I just really minded. And I think I used to drive people mad because I'd be like, that's not okay. You've got to just get amongst the detail. And the operations guy and I endlessly fell out because he was just like, just leave us alone. I was like, no, this has to be right. So I learned, and I maybe I'm a little bit softer today, but I was probably a bit of a pain in the ass to work with.
but crucially, I think there's so much to be said for like those early stages of a business or an organization being developed like that. You might, if you are a stickler for the detail, you're setting a standard that ultimately becomes part of the fabric of the way the organization operates and develops. So it's crucial to be a stickler for the detail from the very beginning, because it's so much harder to address those details when you're bigger and ultimately more cumbersome, if you like.
The designers would still say to me, I was so annoying about any what they call curly corners on designing magazines and like logos be the wrong place and stuff. I used to just, it was just all those bits, but it's served me well in a way, and I kind of bring it through to very much what I'm trying to create today. It's to kind of it is about doing, providing work for clients that is of a certain level, and sloppiness and not doing it right, and consistency. I think it's consistency, because it's what you build a brand doing for me. And I was really the kind of I was really working to try and enable the vision of the 3 female founders. I was really inspired by them. 3 women, all of a kind of a certain age, who were doing something that was really different, and I was really inspired by that.
And I want to come back to, I want to touch upon like the entrepreneurial side of things in you and the role that's played. But just talking again, I want to pry into the sort of realization of the focus on sustainability within Ochre. Like how much you were part of the marketing team. You obviously had a background in PR. Like how much of a decision for Ochre in terms of sort of committing to or exploring sustainability as a whole was down to a reputational intention versus an operational one, do you think?
I think, strangely, whilst other industries like fashion and beauty had been doing this for quite a long time and were getting some maturity, the interiors side really wasn't. And I think, but at the same time, I think there were these risks. There were the risks that were coming out where people were starting to talk about supply chain and what that meant. And there were the kind of rumblings of brands that were being kind of outed because they'd found kind of, modern slavery in their supply chains. And I think there was this kind of underlying view that whilst the business had been set up, very much that the founders would travel over to all over the world, finding these incredible suppliers who were unique, and they were really very focused on having those incredible craftspeople that they sought out all over the world. But as the business grew and they probably became more distanced from actually having those relationships, because you get merch departments and product development, everyone in between, you lose perhaps some of that engagement with this directly with the supplier from the founders. And I think the risk was like, actually what is happening? We're growing. So what's happening to our supply base, and how are they growing? And is it responsible? And do we know what's happening in there? And I think there was that whole piece around working with countries like Myanmar and being proud of it because it was supporting women and villages. But actually there was some underlying, concerns about that. So I think, I think it was the right time to be looking at it. And whilst I think a lot of it was potentially in place, it was just a case of saying, right, let's pull all of this together and work out where the gaps are. And I think by doing that, in terms of building out that strategy, it was a really great way to do that, because you get all the right stakeholders involved and really understand, where your risks are from a reputation. With new investors on board, they want to make sure that this has not got brand reputational damage risk, which I understand, and just have that really unpack it all and say, let's build this out. And so that everybody's very, very clear what the vision is, what the pillars are, and who's accountable. Just so as the business continues to grow, it's embedded as part of the culture.
And Mirry, that was brilliantly described, and thank you for addressing. That was a slightly prickly question from me, but you addressed it beautifully. Like, what were, by the time you left, from a sustainability perspective, what were the most significant things that had changed within the organization?
So I still work with them on a consultancy. They're one of my clients. So I kind of I've never been able to get a step right away from them. But what were the big things that changed? I think having sustainability on the agenda, I think having the clarity of what sustainability meant. Sustainability means such a different thing to so many different people. And I think that's what makes it so complex. It's like, what does it mean to you? And what does it mean? Some people say, oh, it's about, environmentalism. And other people say it's about people. So it's like actually identifying what it meant to the business and mapping out, what I think meant that the clarity of having some goals and accountability meant that it was being discussed at a board level on a monthly basis, on a regular basis. And I think the B Corp process was a really, those are the kind of big things that have made a real change. Because when you get to the point when you can start to really understand where you are and measure your progress, that's where you start to get more impact. And honesty and transparency is very much part of that, because, this takes time. These kind of building out plans and roadmaps and looking where you want to be in a series of time takes time. And so nothing happens overnight. So it's been a really engaging process for a business to be kind of part of. And I think that's what's inspired me to take other businesses through that with other clients.
And Mirry, you are a podcaster's dream, because you just segued on to my next question, which is fantastic. Let's talk about setting up Be Able, and you described beautifully how, you realized that you wanted to help other SMEs kind of, do something similar, perhaps at a slightly different scale in an earlier stage, but ultimately, adopt some of the great work that you've done at Oka, during the time working with them, and you continue work with them. But were you looking back to Newcastle politics student, Mirry? Was there always the intention and goal within you to run your own business? Was there that entrepreneurial element always there?
It's a very good question. I think it always was. I mean, I watched at one stage in my life when I was younger, and my father lost his job, and my mother was charged with how is she going to how are they going to kind of get through this next bit? She randomly bought home a catalogue of costume jewelry and started selling it off the kitchen table. And the next thing I knew, she was, on telephone calls to Australia and America and doing trainings to people worldwide and bringing in a salary that was far in excess of what my father was bringing in, and, buying us our first cars. So, I guess I looked at her. I was fortunate enough to work then just underneath the founders at Oka, but they gave me such kind of responsibility that I really felt like I could, do. I was really lucky. I was really lucky to be able to do as much as I did there. And they trusted me, which I think was a kind of key thing. And I then sat back, being a mum of 3 and having had a few years of trying to kind of juggle the mum thing. I was like, well, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm done. And then, you know what? I just, in the last few years, woke up. I was like, no, I don't think I can. I tried to sit there and go, I could just go work for someone else. Or actually, I could just do this on my own as an independent. But I didn't want to do that. I was like, no, I want to create more impact than what I can do sitting around my kitchen table. I love being with people. And I really felt that by building a business and building a team, I love being part of a team. I don't know everything. I don't want to be that person that does everything. I like to have a really great team around me. It's what gets me excited. And which I do. And I've managed, I'm really proud. One of the things I'm really proud of since we set up Be Able is to have a really great team around me who are, experts way above me probably, but I really, we just have a really nice culture in the business, and we want to work with brands who feel the same. So that real kind of human touch to me, and that building those brands and partnerships is very much the kind of vision that I want to create at Be Able.
And Mirry, on that point, and I think we spoke about this in the preamble before the show started, but what are the kind of commonalities in the types of clients, the types of people that you're looking to work with at Be Able?
So, although I obviously lean into the interiors side because I have 25 plus years in interiors, and I'm fascinated and feel that I need to kind of put some energy into that. We're kind of industry agnostic. So, we've been working across fashion and beauty. And, I mentioned earlier in a really interesting company called Clip recently, who are doing kind of IT hardware, so a circular business for IT, so preventing all the e-waste and the toxicity of that and kind of globally. So, I think where I've got to in terms of the question you're asking is we want to work with people who understand how this can benefit. So it's not necessarily that they want to save the planet. They maybe have a more of a kind of, it could be social, it could be environmental, it could be just the fact that they're running commercial businesses that need to be successful. And this is part of that. Mm-hmm. So, it's not about, I think it is that kind of focus to say, look, I understand that primarily you have to drive sales and you have to make your business profitable. But underlying that, how do you do that? What are the processes in place that makes you a better business? So, and I think more often than not, what I'm discovering is that comes from the top, because you can have lots of passion at the bottom, but you have to have buy-in from the CEOs, the CFOs, and it's a really interesting one for me because it's a different conversation you have with each one of those leadership people as to why they want to do it. As a marketing director hat on, I'll sit there and say, well, I want really good content that I can share with my customers, because I firmly believe that it's an opportunity for marketing departments to be able to recruit new customers through different storytelling. We've become very lazy, I say it, from a marketing point of view, of just selling product and music, of just buy. I think building brands around content that talks about what they're doing to improve both social or reduce or improve their impact in this area is going to be a real opportunity for brands to create collaborations and partnerships and talk differently and have improve their customer loyalty, which ultimately as marketeer, that's where the value is, and build the brand and make you more investable, so and more of a stronger brand.
I love that. That was a really nice synopsis of the value at play. But Mirry, let me ask you one question before we move on to the article. I want to get your crystal ball out here, and I want you to answer the question of, when you get to the end of your career and you look back on what you've done, what do you want to be able to say about what you did?
It's a good point. One of my children was saying that the other day. So I have 3 children, and they range from kind of 12 to 16. And one of them said to me the other day, 2 things. One is why are we having to clean up all the mess that you've made, which I thought was quite, thanks very much. And why is it our responsibility? So I was like, well, I am trying, and that's what I'm trying to do. The other thing, and what I have real aspirations to do, my longer term plan, is that by bringing brands on this journey, whereby we engage with brands, we help them along their journey, bringing their teams into the process so that we can upskill their teams whilst we're building out what this means to them. And then how you implement it. So the challenges that you have, that companies face once you've got it in place, of actually how do you implement it? How do you implement a responsible sourcing plan? How do you implement, a communication strategy? So helping them on that. In the end, what I would love is that I look back at the clients that we work with to say, because they'd understand and done this piece of work, they'd have so much opportunity of working with both social and environmental projects, perhaps as collaboration. So, I look at the interiors industry, I was like, look at the homelessness. When you're looking at the IT, look at the digital divide. How can brands come together collaboratively or with different organizations to create impact? And that becomes part of marketing. That's the kind of big move from a marketing point of view, to say, actually, this is what becomes normal for brands to say, we're proud that we work with on these projects, and we've provided, we've gained impact by doing these projects. And I just would love to be able to see some of those happening. And it could be anywhere in the world. It may be around the community that you work with in a factory in India, or it may be about what's happening on your doorstep around your distribution centre in, wherever you are in the UK, but where you can make an impact on people's lives or on the environment. That's what I'd like to be able to say.
I love that. You would have operated as a catalyst, a catalyst for impact initiatives to have taken place. I think that's a fantastic reflection, Mirry, on what you hope to do.
I would say that the only thing that I would say is and I don't know whether it's the green room, which I know we've talked about, and whether, this is the right time to talk about that, or whether
go for it. Yeah, introduce it.
So alongside, obviously, the Be Able business and my desire to change the interiors industry, or to gain momentum, I think is probably the word, not change, but gain momentum in the interiors industry. I joined up with Jules Haynes last year, from the Haynes Collection, who's got a fabulous marketplace that sells waste fabrics, textiles. We kind of came together and realised that the interiors industry needed a bit of a kick out the ass. So we decided that actually by helping them to understand what good looked like, and helping to kind of share some knowledge, it might be the way forward. So we kind of came up with the green room, and we thought we'd speak to a few brands and see whether they might be interested in just telling us what they're doing, and give us a bit of a have a chat, perhaps in a pub with 4 or 5 of us, and see what we could probably do together. And so it launched last year, and it just got huge kind of, everybody seemed to love it. So we ended up we're over 50 brands now. We've got some really, really great, big high street brands and some little ones. And it's really been an amazing opportunity. We've got some ambassadors who endorse it, who are kind of industry kind of experts. And we've just managed to kind of get people to come together in what is a very competitive landscape on all interiors. I mean, I've been in that place where no one wants to tell anybody anything because they're worried that they might steal their supplier, or get one ahead. And everybody's coming together for a series of round the tables, in-person meetings, and webinars where we deliver some learnings and give people an opportunity to meet and network. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about packaging, waste, energy, responsible sourcing. We ask them what the key topics are that they feel like they need to know. B Corp, impact reporting. We're just covering off and trying to share as much as we can, so that we can help brands to cut the corners. You're not sitting at home Googling, trying to work out how you get the answers to these questions, but, let's share and work together. And I think it's really exciting. And I think when I mentioned earlier about doing some kind of an impact project, our goal for the green room would be to do something like that, where everybody comes together and says, we can do this together.
I love it, Mirry. I absolutely love it. The green room is, a fantastic initiative, and it's you're really practicing what you preach. I think doing something of that nature.
Get rid of the jargon. Get rid of all the stuff that no one understands. What does it really mean? No question is too stupid in the green room. Anyone can ask anything. Just keep it real, so people know what you're talking about.
Wow, that's a dangerous statement, Mirry. I'll be coming along and asking some very silly questions then. Let's move on. We've brilliantly obliterated our 20 minutes on talking about you, but that's absolutely fine.
So boring.
No, you've been fantastic. Would you mind, though, moving on, Mirry, just providing our listeners with a bit of a summary of the, I think it was Design Central piece from October last year. Would you mind just providing a bit of a summary of what the article covers, and then just picking out for me whatever the most kind of interesting or salient points were from the piece for you?
I think it's a really interesting article, and it particularly resonated with me because we've been, whilst I've worked in the kind of brand space for interior design, there's a huge amount of people who are working in the interior design space, and whilst working with more of them in the last kind of 12 months, I've kind of got to understand how difficult it is as an interior designer, because, you are working in between kind of your suppliers and the client. And particularly, you don't have a choice. Some clients maybe come to you and are kind of, they have it already, they've got the kind of radar for wanting to be responsible and sustainable. But very often your projects can involve gutting houses, adding waste to sometimes people just move into a house and they just want to, change it, and just because they don't like it. And so they're just, there's a huge amount of waste that's the perception within this world. And then, lots and lots of money often coming in where people use designers to kind of bring in new and fresh. And I think you sit in the middle as a designer and say, how can I influence, what decisions my client makes? Because, they are the one that's making these calls. So I think it's been very interesting to see, and within the article, is the education piece for the interior designers as to how you can do this. So what can you keep? How can you potentially, source, reclaimed, recycled, anything that is already existing, so that we don't need to just always buy more. And I think some designers have done that really well. I think there is a responsibility for brands, because, the brands that are supplying them ultimately are the ones that need to be very transparent to the interior designer about, what it is they're selling. So if the brands understand and have that transparency to say, look, this product has been sourced out of, reclaimed timber, recycled this, or, energy, low energies, whatever it is that comes with those products, and they can feed that information to the interior designer, they will be more informed. Because not every interior designer by any way can have the level of knowledge that's needed to be able to kind of have that debate, not argument, but debate with their client. And I think the other bit is that it doesn't have to be more expensive. There is a huge perception that being sustainable has to be more expensive. And I think a lot of this is about, what can you reuse? How can you go to, old kind of take reclaimed pieces and give them a new life? And I think if that is, I think it's a big challenge. Whereas, and I think it's knowledge is a big challenge. And I think the interior designers really need that knowledge from the people that they're buying their products from, in order to make some kind of change.
And Mirry, do they also need, because they are like almost stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't they?
Yeah.
At times? They're essentially that, how do you go about thinking about sustainability? And I know we're using broad terms for this conversation. So, infer when I use the term sustainability within the interiors context in whichever way you'd like to. But when it comes to an interior designer going and trying to influence the decision making of their client, who ultimately is holding the purse strings, what can they do? Beyond being educated, how do you go about communicating that most effectively to a client?
I think there's a great organization called Interior Design Declares, who work very hard with interior designers in order to give them options potentially for suppliers that they can use. So giving them a kind of little black book options, because I think that is what's really hard sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But, so they can present, because the one thing they do have is they can present what they want to a client. So they do have an element of control. They say, look, I can only, if I want to, I can just give them these options, and they need to choose from there. Ultimately, and I think a lot of interior designers will find it, ultimately, it's very, very difficult to persuade a client, because although people have a responsibility, across all industries, you're still finding that the consumers, whilst there is elements of them wanting to shop more sustainably and do more, primarily their choice is about whether they like something or not. So it doesn't matter whether it's the food or the clothes or whatever. We're working with a great newly launched marketplace called the Fairground, which is just holding sustainable brands that have reached certain credentials. But primarily, even with them, is that people do care. They go there to the site because they care, but they pick the products. It's about the product. So again, whether it's an interior designer or fashion, beauty, whatever, it is still the leader is the actual aesthetics of the product that people want to buy. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect that to change. I think what you can do is open up new segments of customers to your business by communicating the right way, who only do want to buy from sustainable brands. But that's the opportunity. If you wanted to kind of look at improving your ROI, you go out to by opening this, you are going to potentially recruit new customers. But, they are still a relatively small pot of the kind of the mass population who, want to buy what they want to buy, but, there is a bit more responsibility coming in.
And Mirry, is there a slight, and I'm going to be a bit not, am I going to be playful, but a bit naughty here with a question or two, but is there not an elephant in the room that's all around, like, and again, I know nothing about interiors, but interiors, presumably, if you're well off enough in order to pay for an interior designer to help you with your home, then there's a degree of wanting, the aspirational, the luxury associated with what you're producing. Have we gone beyond there being concerns about sustainable product, and whether or not it's as aspirational and as luxury as people want, or is that an unfounded concern?
I think what's really exciting in the interiors industry at the moment is that you have got brands that are experimenting and creating product which is at a very, very high level. Jennifer Manners, who's one of our ambassadors for the Green Room, makes her rugs out of recycled plastic bottles. But they are of a very, very high standard. So, I think that for me is the really exciting piece, is that with the right minds and the right innovation, there could be what can be created is actually can be better. They're better, but there's so much opportunity for innovation and different, using product circularity and using all the kind of necessary reusing, you have a one-off, you reuse a product that you find in the market and you give it a new life. It's, it's a one-off. It's, it's something different. And I think that creativity is kind of exciting for the interiors industry and brands that will win were the ones that kind of step back and go, actually, what could we do with what we have and where can we go that actually does align to our brand and what we want to sell and what we want to be known as, but with, a reduced impact on the planet.
Mirry, would you say in light of that sustainability has almost become quite sexy within the interiors sector? I.e., like, if I can turn around and I can, it's a beautiful thing and it's a high quality made, and did you know it's been made out of recycled bottles? Is that like an additional value add to the customer experience at the end of the day? For sure. And I think as more and more people realize this, because it gives you, it's another added quality for what you're buying. I think, if it can be done at the right and the product is good and, essentially sustainable product. I think the word is the biggest problem because I think people kind of shirk away from the word sustainability. But I think if you've got a product that is about longevity, it lasts, it's unique, it's a one-off, it's, beautifully crafted, if it can be locally, it's all those, if it's reused, I think people are proud of that now. I think rather than kind of feeling like something that you might have bought in a kind of antique shop was a bit second best, or I remember going to a stage where my parents would be kind of like offloading all their second hand. I'd be like, oh, this is awful. But actually now that's an opportunity for kind of go, actually, what can we do to this? And I think, and how does this, fit into, how can we use, either it's wasted materials, wasted fabrics, or, an old piece and recreate something that people come into your home and go, wow, that's amazing. And you'll be like, it's one of you can't get anymore. It's kind of makes it more appealing and more special. That was beautifully, you've taken all of my comments and you've made them, you've really expanded and provided a much better context for them. So thank you for doing that, Mirry. Let me ask you a couple of questions about the future for the interiors industry. Like, what are the biggest challenges in your mind facing the interiors industry when it comes to sustainability in the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years? What do you think are going to be the biggest problems or biggest challenges?
I think there's one of the challenges. I think there are multiple different challenges. And I think some of them is I've always felt with the furniture industry is you are dealing with big pieces of furniture. So, where is the kind of, I used to think, at times. It would be lovely to have a product that just went through a letterbox. But actually, with furniture, you've got big pieces of furniture that need lots of materials, often very complex materials to put together. They need space. I mean, if you're buying them, whether you're buying them locally or whether you're buying them from the Far East or wherever you are, they need space in a container. They need space in lorries. They need space in warehouse, all of which is cost and also emissions and impact. So, that is one to tackle. They need lots of packaging. So EPR and the new extended producer packaging requirements will impact, a lot of furniture interiors brands because they're bringing in, lots of packaging. You've got to be, if you don't package it properly, your product gets damaged. If you're damaged, you're just creating more waste. So, these are some, beautiful glass lamps. They get damaged if you're not, how do you package those? Which is we're all got used to kind of polystyrene and using things that really did protect them. What are the solutions here? They are out there, but I think that's one of the areas. And I think, when it comes to being inspired by what other industries like fashion have done with secondhand and all that piece, I think there's companies like Vinteri's that are doing a fabulous job of bringing things and keeping them, extending their life. Mm-hmm. I also think it's really hard for people. I do Vinted all the time with my children and with me and whatever. And you just pop it in, you put what you have in a little envelope and pop it in an impost locker down the road. But if you're doing a sofa or a dining table or big pieces, it's like, how do you really move this stuff around? Cost effectively, for one. But how do you prevent damage? Those kind of things. It's a minefield. However, I do think that where there's challenges, there's also opportunity. And it sounds a bit, but I really do think that looking at how people live and looking at their homes and whether it's lighting particular alternatives or anything. But I also think that as an industry, they're incredibly creative. There are a lot of brilliant brains in the interiors industry, and I believe that all of these challenges are overcomeable, if that's a word, through collaboration and people working together. And we're always going to have homes. We're always going to need things too. But, looking and being inspired by brands that are doing this work, and some of them are in the green room where they're doing some incredible work around, addressing these issues now will be real inspiration for other brands who go, actually, I think I can do this. And I think that's how it will work. People will be inspired to see what other people do. And then they'll go, we can do this. We can do something like this. It's a challenge to see whether we can do better than them.
Which is hence why I think it's so brilliant, the work that you're doing with the Green Room. I think, to provide that kind of forum for people to collaborate and partner up. And, it's a common theme on the Responsible Age, talking to people about the need for more open source collaboration and partnership. And I think it's fantastic that you're doing what you're doing, within the interior space on that front. Mirry, we have brilliantly, as you can see, rattled through 43 odd minutes of a lovely conversation together. I feel like we've only just started, but we'll conclude on the article there, and I'll now finish with the magic wand question. So, Mirry, if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I think it would be about changing the perception of sustainability so that companies will see the benefits of it. It's not so that they don't see it as just a cost and something that they have to do or a tick box exercise. It becomes something that they see the positives of embedding it. So, and that comes at every level, from end to end, from the people that work in their business. So they are, bought into their purpose and the culture of the business, the way you work. But it also extends out to all stakeholders, to suppliers, to customers, and just to realize that the value is its value. In a positive way, and to embrace it, and it will make your business more successful, and it will give your business a chance to thrive in the future.
Do you know what? I absolutely love that as a magic wand suggestion, Mirry, and in particular in the current climate, because I think looking across the pond and reflecting upon what's happened recently, I should say we're recording the show on January the 30th, so we've obviously just had a couple of weeks of the new Trump administration. And for me, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think what I'm hoping for is I'm hoping that with deregulation and with a lack of government involvement and pressure, it'll actually shine a light on those organizations that really adopt sustainability at the core and the heart of how they operate as organizations. And actually almost that polarization that's caused by the government, I think will possibly, shine a light on those organizations that are doing brilliant things to an even greater extent. So I know that's a kind of a perverse way of maybe thinking about it, but I think we might be hitting into a really impactful period in terms of being able to stick those really forward-thinking and innovative and committed organizations up on some pedestals to say, even in these conditions, look at what these
look at what they can achieve with this underpinning your business. And I think getting everybody, the other bit that I feel really strong about is that everybody needs to do their bit. Everybody is responsible for what happens to the future of our planet. And, if everybody does a bit, we will make progress. It's when people kind of go, well, I can't do anything because, you need to leave it to the big boys. That's not it. It's like everybody has that responsibility, whether all business owners and, frankly, everybody. So, that's what we need to do.
Here, Mirry. What a good call to arms to finish on. What a brilliant conversation we've had. Mirry, thank you so much for today. That was absolutely brilliant. I know you said that you were going to quote fall apart when we started recording, but you absolutely didn't. You were brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Charlie. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Mirry Christie, CEO of Be Able, for sharing her insights on how businesses can simplify and integrate sustainability into their strategies. Today, we explored the tension between sustainability and business priorities, the risks of inaction, and the tangible benefits of embedding responsible practices into corporate frameworks, particularly within the interiors industry. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.